Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to bring you the essential insights from the information you need. Today we're diving into a quiet but absolutely critical crisis, often overshadowed by the headlines: the increasing global shortages of life-saving antibiotics. If you've been following global events, you know how everything from the COVID-19 pandemic to geopolitical tensions and even, rising economic nationalism has really highlighted just how fragile our global value chains can be, especially for products as essential as medicines.
That's right. It's a problem that touches everyone, everywhere. Really. Our mission today is to go beyond the headlines and truly understand not just what policies governments are considering to tackle these vital supply chain disruptions, but how they aim to fundamentally reconfigure these incredibly complex global value chains.
Right.
We'll also explore the challenges they face and, crucially, what lessons they hold for other nations.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut to understanding the intricate, often hidden web that brings crucial medications to patients. And, what it truly takes to secure that supply when the world gets a little shaky. Let's unpack this.
Okay, so let's start with something we often take for granted: the immense social value of antibiotics. I mean, they literally save millions of lives yearly from infections. And they make other crucial therapies like major surgery and chemotherapy even possible.
Absolutely essential.
But here's where it gets really interesting and frankly pretty alarming. Despite their indispensable importance, antibiotics are, ironically, among the medicines most often subject to shortages across Europe.
That's wild.
Yeah. And when we talk about a shortage here, we simply mean a situation where a market authorization holder, or MAH, that's basically the company licensed to sell the drug, just can't meet the national demand for a product.
That's a staggering thought, given how important they are. And to really grasp the core of this vulnerability, we're going to zoom in on Sweden as a fascinating case study. You might be wondering, why Sweden? It's a relatively small, high-income country, about 10.5 million people, and notably very low antibiotic use compared to others.
Right. But that small market size is precisely why it's such a crucial focus.
How so?
It means Sweden is, hardly prioritized by large global suppliers. They just don't buy enough volume, which dramatically increases its risk of shortages.
I see.
The numbers are frankly pretty striking. The Swedish Medical Product Agency recorded 337 antibiotic shortages between 2018 and 2024.
Wow, 337.
Yeah, and the average length was 150 days per shortage.
That's almost half a year.
Exactly. Affecting as many as 180 different global value chains.
Yeah.
It just underscores how precarious this situation is, doesn't it?
It really does.
Sweden is also quite unique because it seeks a wide variety of antibiotic products, all in very small volumes. This is partly to combat antibiotic resistance, which is a whole other important issue. But as you can imagine, needing lots of different things in small amounts complicates its supply needs even further.
Right, harder to manage.
Definitely. To truly grasp the vulnerability, it really helps to visualize the journey an antibiotic takes, from raw material to patient. It's a complex, multi-stage dance, typically involving 5 key steps.
Okay, walk us through it.
First, you have the kind of unsung heroes, the active pharmaceutical ingredient or API producers. These are the factories churning out the main raw chemical ingredients, the essence of the drug, really.
Got it, the core stuff.
Then these ingredients travel to the final dosage formulation, or FDF, producers. They take the API and other ingredients and transform them into the familiar pills, liquids, or injectables we recognize.
The finished product form.
Exactly. Next in line is the market authorization holder, or MAH. Essentially, the company responsible for bringing the final drug product to market in a specific country, getting it approved, selling it.
Okay.
From there, it typically moves to a wholesaler who manages local inventories before finally reaching the hospitals or pharmacies for patient use.
And who's in charge, generally?
MAHs are generally considered the lead firms in these chains. They hold the license. What's particularly illuminating here is that antibiotic GVCs are typically vertically deintegrated. Meaning each step is often handled by a different company. And they're highly geographically concentrated. You find Chinese firms, for instance, highly specialized in API production, and Indian firms specializing in FDF production. Very common pattern.
And this geographical concentration, along with that vertical deintegration, that leads to some really critical weaknesses driving these shortages.
Precisely. First, there's that overwhelming overdependence. The sources point out that the whole world's needs for specific antibiotics often hinge on just 1 or 2 factories. It's incredible.
Just 1 or 2.
Often, yes. A truly memorable and frankly terrifying example happened in 2017. A global shortage of the key antibiotic piperacillin tazobactam was caused by a fire in the only factory in the world producing its API.
The only one.
The only one. And that factory was located in China. Imagine the global ripple effect from a single factory fire.
That incident is genuinely shocking. It highlights an almost unimaginable level of fragility. What does that tell us about the fundamental assumptions our global supply chains are built on, assumptions that clearly aren't holding up?
Well, it tells us that for too long, the primary assumption has been about efficiency and cost-cutting above all else. Resilience wasn't really the priority.
Yeah.
When the entire world's supply of a critical drug can hinge on one factory, that's not just a supply chain. It's like a single point of catastrophic failure. The efficiencies built in, while good in stable times, become huge vulnerabilities during crises.
Makes sense.
Another major weakness tied into this is the incredibly low profit margins for generic antibiotics.
Right.
Because of fierce price-cutting tenders from national health systems, there's simply less money for crucial plant maintenance, upgrades, innovation.
Which increases the risk of production stopping.
Exactly. It reminds me of, well, when margins are razor thin, any unexpected cost is a crisis. It's the same for these factories.
Yeah. And compounding that is the inherent rigidity of production systems for these drugs.
Precisely. Antibiotic production requires very large batches, often much larger than a single country's yearly demand. And it involves long lead times, sometimes months. This makes it incredibly difficult to match demand fluctuations, which can be sudden.
So you can't just quickly ramp up production if needed.
Not easily, no. And then companies, understandably, treat inventories as an excessive cost, so they keep stock levels very low.
Which leaves absolutely no buffer, no room for error. It's a lean, mean, but fragile machine.
You're right. And there's also often a general lack of coordination across the chain. Weak relationships, limited communication between the different actors.
So early warnings of problems are rare.
Very rare. And in some extreme cases, particularly for those very low-margin generics, MAHs might just decide it's no longer profitable. They withdraw products from the market altogether, causing a permanent shortage. Just pull the plug.
Wow.
So if we zoom out a bit and see what this data truly means for Sweden's overall vulnerability, the analysis of its 367 generic antibiotic GVCs paints a stark picture. About 17.1% are considered top risk.
Top risk meaning?
Meaning they're supplied by only one MAH, no alternatives available whatsoever.
Yikes.
And within this group, 9 GVCs have, like, the absolute minimum structure. Only one API factory and one FDF factory. Extreme concentration.
The highest possible risk, basically.
Pretty much. Another 9.3% are high risk, supplied by multiple MAH, but still relying on a single factory for both API and FDF stages.
Still very fragile.
Yes, and then 42.8% fall into the medium risk category. Only one factory at either the API or FDF step, or where both factories are located in just one country.
So the takeaway.
The analysis makes it incredibly clear that only about 15% of Swedish antibiotic GVCs can be considered unaffected by substantial supply risk.
Only 15%.
Yeah, it profoundly underscores the urgent need for new GVC-oriented policies. Something has to change.
Okay, so the question becomes, what is Sweden doing about this? They're exploring 6 key strategies to enhance supply chain resilience, and it's a playbook many other nations are watching closely. Perhaps the most direct approach is mandatory parallel sourcing.
Right.
The goal here is to literally spread antibiotic supply volume among multiple MAHs and their upstream links, like FDF and API producers. This directly addresses that dangerous overdependence on single actors and those recurrent production problems we just discussed.
What's fascinating here is that this policy would fundamentally lead to a structural increase in the number of GVCs for key drugs, more pathways. It also forces relational changes, because otherwise competing actors would suddenly need to coordinate their efforts to ensure supply for Sweden.
That's a big shift.
It is. This impacts a significant portion of Sweden's GVCs. About 60% that rely on single-country API suppliers, 30% with single-country FDF suppliers, and particularly the 16.8% with both links in a single country.
That sounds promising, spreading the risk. But what's the realistic downside here? Are there any, unintended consequences Sweden might be overlooking?
Absolutely. The main hurdles are increased purchasing and administrative costs. It's just more complex. Plus, the inherent difficulty of coordinating between what are usual competitors.
Yeah, getting them to play nice.
Exactly. And the practical difficulty of finding alternative, qualified suppliers who are willing to take on smaller orders for a market like Sweden's. The state's role would be quite significant here, acting as both a regulator, mandating these procedures, and a strategic buyer, using incentives.
Okay. Beyond ensuring multiple suppliers, another core strategy focuses on simply ensuring there's enough product in reserve. That leads us to mandatory security stocks.
Right, stockpiling.
The idea here is to require MAHs, FDF, and API factories to maintain higher operative stock levels, for example, 6 months of stock specifically for Sweden's needs. This directly tackles issues like uncertain demand, limited supplier planning, and those low prices that discourage companies from holding inventory.
The core insight here isn't just about stockpiling. It's recognizing how this policy forces a fundamental reevaluation of just-in-time efficiency. And it highlights the financial burden of resilience. Who pays?
Good question.
It demands expanded storage capacity. And while there's minimal change to the overall GVC structure, it certainly shifts power towards actors managing these inventories. MAHs would be compelled to strengthen coordination with their offshore factories to ensure that stock can actually be deployed rapidly when needed.
I can imagine the headaches with that. High inventory costs, potential disputes over who pays for what, and the risk of product expiration or wastage, especially with shorter shelf life drugs. Is that a big concern?
It definitely is. These are real challenges. Things go out of date. The state would act as a regulator, setting clear rules on inventory levels and locations, and potentially even as a direct buyer, maintaining its own strategic stockpiles as a last resort.
Okay. And what about adapting to an ever-changing manufacturing landscape? This brings us to facilitating factory changes post-approval. This aims to simplify the incredibly complex process of transferring production files and permits for older generic drugs to new or updated manufacturing facilities.
Yeah, this one's quite important. It addresses rigid production systems, reliance on outdated factories, and the notorious difficulties of permit transfers. The main benefit, of course, is reducing product deregistration when MHs just pull unprofitable products because changing factories is too hard.
So it keeps more drugs on the market.
Exactly. This policy is quite clever because it's designed to foster competition among FDF and API factories by reducing those cumbersome switching costs. We expect it to increase the number of available factories and enhance GVC flexibility, ultimately reducing an MAH's dependence on any single factory.
That sounds broadly positive.
It is. It's a particularly relevant option for small, high-income, open economies because it empowers both large and small MAHs. Large ones can leverage their multiple plants, while smaller ones gain bargaining power.
What's the biggest hurdle to achieving this in practice? It sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare to untangle.
It can be. The challenges include significant public costs for regulatory updates. The agencies need resources. There's also the risk of accepting suboptimal plants if standards are lowered too much in the name of flexibility.
A balancing act.
Right. And potential price increases as factories gain more flexibility and maybe charge more. Here, the state acts primarily as a facilitator, offering expertise and guidance, and a regulator simplifying those requirements.
Okay, policy 4 on Sweden's list. Relocate antibiotic production closer to the end market. This could mean nearshoring within Europe or even backshoring production right to Sweden itself.
This tackles the decreased number of European producers, the high geographic concentration we saw in China and India, and those ever-growing geopolitical risks.
Makes sense to bring it closer.
This policy specifically targets about 30% of Swedish GVCs that rely on API factories in China or India. However, it's important to note that backshoring API production all the way to Sweden is probably economically unfeasible.
Too expensive for a small market.
Exactly. Prohibitive costs relative to Sweden's market size. Nearshoring FDF or API production to other European countries is far more feasible. European factories often have spare capacity.
So focus on Europe rather than Sweden itself.
Generally, yes. While it leads to stronger relationships with these nearshored factories, it might also reduce the variety of supply from Asian producers if they lose interest in smaller assignments. A potential trade-off.
So we're talking about a significant investment then, potentially sacrificing some variety for proximity and maybe more security?
Exactly. The challenges are significant. Large public and private investments are needed. There's the risk of infringing EU state aid rules designed to prevent unfair competition.
The EU dimension.
Yes. And potential negative effects on competition if too much production is consolidated, even within Europe. The state's role could range from a facilitator, offering incentives for relocation, to even a potential producer, perhaps owning plants directly in some cases.
Interesting. Policy number 5 is improved information sharing and transparency across the entire supply chain. The goal is to enhance data sharing on consumption, needs, stocks, production capacity, using interconnected IT systems for early warnings.
Right. This directly addresses the current lack of transparency and communication, and it also supports other policies, like mandatory security stocks. You need good data to manage stocks and facilitating factory changes.
How does transparency actually change things on the ground?
Well, what's fascinating here is that greater transparency may prompt MAHs to strategically shift production. They might move away from outdated, high-risk Asian factories towards European or maybe higher standard Asian facilities that are willing to share data.
So it incentivizes better practices.
Potentially, yes. While this might initially lead to fewer FDF and API factories available for Sweden if some don't meet the new transparency criteria, it's ultimately expected to increase European participation and improve overall Asian standards for those who remain. It also fosters better vertical coordination within GVCs.
That sounds like a long-term play, but crucial. What are the practical barriers to getting everyone to share data? I mean, companies like their secrets.
They do. It comes with high IT integration costs. You need systems that talk to each other. There's the need to agree on common data standards across many different companies and countries. And, of course, significant issues around confidentiality and legal barriers. Who sees what? The state's role here is primarily as a facilitator, encouraging and helping to implement data sharing, and a regulator requiring disclosure of critical information.
Okay. Finally, Policy 6, new reimbursement models for generic antibiotics. This builds on Sweden's successful 2020 scheme for new antibiotics, where a fixed yearly payment was given to companies regardless of how many units were sold. A kind of subscription model.
Exactly. Like Netflix for antibiotics.
Yeah. So the new policy could offer MAHs fixed yearly payments of, say, €100,000 per selected generic antibiotic. This directly addresses insufficient supplier returns due to fierce price competition and a lack of long-term commitment. Makes it worthwhile for them.
Yes. And Sweden's earlier model even allowed them to get 5 new antibiotics registered in Sweden considerably earlier than much larger EU countries. It worked.
So it has a track record.
It does. This is a powerful financial lever. The impact is that it significantly strengthens relationships between MAHs and their upstream GVC links. And crucially, with public bodies. Contractual conditions, like needing rapid deliveries, may compel MAHs to prioritize FDF and API factories closer to Sweden, likely increasing European participation.
So it helps with the gathering goal, too.
Potentially, yes. Ultimately, it incentivizes registration and helps prevent stockouts by making these essential but low-margin products profitable and stable.
That sounds like it tackles the core profitability issue head-on. What's the biggest catch with this one?
The challenges include administrative complexity in setting up these contracts. It's not simple. There's difficulty in selecting which products to include without distorting the market or picking winners, and potential supplier reactions or unintended competition risks if it's not designed carefully. Here, the state acts primarily as a buyer via these contracts and a regulator through mandatory clauses that can be written into those agreements.
Okay. So pulling all these policies together, what are the overarching strategies at play here? It sounds like there are a few core mechanisms at work for enhancing GVC resilience.
Absolutely. Policies designed to enhance GVC resilience typically employ 3 distinct mechanisms, sometimes in combination. First, multiplying GVCs, simply creating more options and diversification. That's parallel sourcing, facilitating factory changes.
More paths for supply.
Exactly. Second, reinforcing existing GVCs, strengthening current chains through additional slack, better coordination, financial resources, think security stocks, information sharing, and these new reimbursement models, making the current system stronger. And third, gathering GVCs, bringing production geographically closer to the end market. That's the aim of relocation policies and also, indirectly, new reimbursement models if they prioritize faster delivery.
Okay, multiply, reinforce, gather.
That's a good way to think about it. What's crucial to understand is that these mechanisms can be combined, and each policy implies distinct roles for the state: regulator, facilitator, buyer, or even producer.
That's a great framework. So what happens if these policies, designed for a smaller country like Sweden, were scaled up to the EU level? It's a fascinating comparison. Take mandatory parallel sourcing, for example. At the EU level, you have way more existing GVCs, FDF, and API factories, particularly in places like Italy and Spain.
That's right. This means fewer antibiotics might actually need additional parallel chains created from scratch, because much of that duplication could happen within the EU itself, using existing European capacity.
So the impact might be proportionally smaller.
Potentially, yes. The overall impact on the many GVCs supplying the entire EU market would likely be proportionally smaller than on the fewer GVCs supplying only Sweden.
And for mandatory security stocks, the EU offers a much wider range of storage locations, which sounds like an advantage, but does that flexibility bring its own challenges?
It absolutely does. Some EU countries might fear deprioritization if essential stocks are held elsewhere. Will we get our share if the stock is in Germany and we're in Portugal?
Yeah, I can see that causing friction.
A pan-EU mechanism for rapid deployment across all member states would be absolutely crucial to make this work effectively. Otherwise, it just becomes a logistical nightmare, arguing over who gets what when.
Okay. Facilitating factor changes post-approval sounds like it would simply scale up without major structural changes, just affecting more producers across the continent, more volume, same basic idea.
Precisely. That policy is quite adaptable regardless of scale. It works similarly whether it's Sweden or the whole EU doing it.
Now, with relocating antibiotic production at the EU level, does the distinction between nearshoring and backshoring become less relevant for the bloc as a whole?
Yes. It largely does, because the EU is the nearshore region, in a sense, and the much larger sales volumes across the entire EU market make investments in new or expanded European facilities far more financially viable, often without needing the substantial public subsidies that a single small country like Sweden might require. Becomes a better commercial proposition.
Makes sense. Bigger market, more incentive.
Right. As for improved information sharing, while the general effect of increasing European FDF-API participation would be similar, an EU-wide approach could actually facilitate horizontal connections between parallel GVC links.
Horizontal connections, how would that work?
It could allow for, say, shared inventory comparison. Companies supplying different parts of the EU could see where stocks are highest or lowest, and potentially more efficient deployment of existing stocks across the bloc. This kind of coordination could compensate for the risk of fewer viable GVCs overall, because you have better visibility and flexibility with what you do have.
Okay, leveraging the network effect.
Exactly. Now, this is where it gets really interesting at the EU level. New reimbursement models.
You said earlier a single MAH can hardly commit to supplying all 27 EU countries. It's just too big and complex. So what's the proposed solution?
The proposed solution is genuinely transformative. The idea is to grant fixed yearly payments directly to FDF producers instead of MAHs.
To the factories making the pills, not the brand holders.
Precisely. This would fundamentally shift power to FDF producers, effectively making them the new GVC leaders. It could create an entirely new type of drug GVC governance led by manufacturers. Structurally, many new GVCs might be formed directly by these FDF producers.
That's a huge shift.
It is. What's more, this adaptation would make new reimbursement models the only policy capable of exploiting all three resilience mechanisms, multiplying, reinforcing, and gathering, when you consider both the national and EU levels. It's potentially a game changer.
That's a profound shift in power dynamics within the industry. Wow. Overall, it sounds like 4 out of the 6 policies entail pretty substantial changes when moving from the Swedish to the EU context, requiring significantly more coordination efforts and potentially causing competition between countries for resources or production. It's truly a complex puzzle.
Indeed. It highlights that scaling up policy isn't just about making it bigger. It's about fundamentally rethinking its application within a much more complex multi-state ecosystem.
And what about beyond Sweden and the EU? What does their experience teach other nations facing similar supply chain tightropes? If we look at the bigger picture, what does Sweden's experience mean for other small, high-income countries facing similar challenges, like, say, New Zealand or maybe Switzerland?
Well, many other high-income countries, like New Zealand or other Nordics, as you mentioned, face very similar issues. Overdependence on a few Asian API suppliers, that persistent lack of profitability in the generics market, frustrating transparency issues. It's a common story.
Right.
What's crucial here, according to the analysis, is how the effectiveness of these policies often depends on the specific GVC governance structure. Specifically, whether they involve quality generics, typically led by large multinational MAHs with strong brands, versus low-value generics, which often lack a clear lead firm and involve smaller MAHs buying from a more open market.
Okay, so how do those two types of generics affect how effective these policies are? For policies like parallel sourcing and security stocks, do large multinational MAHs have more leverage against smaller countries?
They absolutely do. Large multinational MAHs have significant bargaining power. They might demand higher compensation from smaller countries to make it worth their while to set up parallel chains or hold extra stock. This is perhaps less problematic for countries like Sweden, where low-value generics constitute about 65% of their GVCs, so these policies might be more impactful there.
Interesting. But the policy to facilitate factory changes seems to be a real universal winner, effective for both types of GVCs.
Yes, that one seems quite broadly applicable and well received, because it reduces switching costs for everyone. Large MAHs can leverage their multiple plants more easily. Smaller MAHs gain increased bargaining power because it's easier for them to switch FDF or API suppliers. This makes it a particularly relevant and sort of low-friction option for small, high-income open economies looking to boost flexibility.
Okay. When it comes to relocation, backshoring sounds like it's often too costly for a single small country to justify on its own. We covered that. So what's the alternative there for these smaller nations?
Nearshoring, perhaps, but maybe more powerfully, doing it with joint financial assistance. Imagine, say, the Nordic countries pooling resources to incentivize production in the region. That offers a much stronger bargaining position against even the largest MAHs. Collective action makes it far more viable.
Strength in numbers.
Exactly. Interestingly, even a country smaller than Sweden, New Zealand, has successfully implemented information sharing. What's the key takeaway from that? It shows that small countries can induce transparency from large MAHs, even powerful ones, if they're persistent and strategic. While it's perhaps more likely to affect quality generics GVCs due to the influence of their powerful MAHs, it demonstrates that size isn't everything. Strategic pressure can yield results.
Good point. And new reimbursement models seem like a really attractive option for small, high-income countries, right? Sweden's success is quite compelling.
It truly is. Sweden's experience shows how these countries can strategically use their spending capacity, their ability to guarantee payment to secure access to antibiotics earlier than even larger countries. This model has proven appealing to both large and small MAHs in Sweden because it provides financial stability and predictability where there was once only cutthroat price competition and uncertainty.
So we've taken quite a journey today. From understanding the dire problem of antibiotic shortages and the fundamental vulnerabilities in these global value chains, to exploring Sweden's innovative policy responses, examining how these might scale up to the EU, and extracting valuable lessons for other small economies. It's a truly complex and interconnected issue, deeply impacting healthcare for millions.
Indeed. And it leaves us with a truly provocative thought, I think. Given the recent reclassification of pharmaceuticals as a strategic national security sector in many places and the increasing geopolitical tensions globally, how might future policies not only focus on resilience and access, but also on deliberately shaping GVCs for broader economic and political leverage?
Using supply chains as tools of statecraft. What are the potential trade-offs or unintended consequences there? For patients, for healthcare systems. We encourage you, the listener, to consider the complex, interconnected nature of global health, industrial policy, and international business. This isn't just about drugs. It's really about the fundamental infrastructure of our modern world.